Segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas Coffee, roasted fresh daily in Batavia, Illinois.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM.
And Amy, and we have spoken about our next guest a number of times over the last couple of weeks because he has taken the opportunity of some of the divisiveness within American society to opine on what he thinks should be done and what he's not impressed by. It's always thoughtful comments from Robert Johnson, including this from him on a Fox Business interview about the virtue signaling from white leftists going on.
And so to me, when I see all of this, changing names, toppling statues, firing professors because they said all lives matter, it just shows me that white America is continually incapable of recognizing that Black people have their own ideas and thought about what's in their best interest.
That's a great place to start. And I shouldn't say virtue signaling, I should really say the purge, because that's what it is. It's a purge. We're pleased to be joined now by Robert Johnson, the founder of Black Entertainment Television, BET, RLJ Companies, and America's first Black billionaire. Robert Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, thanks for having me.
So let's build off that statement from you that we just played and talk about the movement to defund the police as well. There was an interesting piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution the other day where the city council in Atlanta, after the Rayshard Brooks shooting and killing at the hands of police, 8 to 7, close, but 8 to 7, they voted against defunding the Atlanta police. And one of the city councilmen in Atlanta, a Black gentleman, said, I hear from residents as shootings have increased in the wake of that police-involved killing of Rayshard Brooks. I hear from my residents, and they say, we don't want the police to go away. We actually want more police in our neighborhoods. So the white inspired, the white left-inspired purge, it's not only not helpful, it could potentially be harmful, couldn't it?
Well, Dan, absolutely, it could be harmful. This goes with what I was saying early on the Fox News report, that white Americans, before they act on behalf of Black Americans, they should simply ask Black Americans what they really want. And I think that shows respect. But to the point of police, if you were to take the police out of the community, you will increase crime significantly in the Black community where there is a lot of crime for a lot of reasons, but the fact is there is crime. And this thought about so-called reimagining the police to send other people out to deal with crisis problems where they range from husband and wife disputes to mental illness and everything, that'll work until one of the sort of reimagined police get hurt or, heaven forbid, get killed because they couldn't control the situation. Or if they form a union which has all kinds of requirements and rules that they feel they need, that again puts us right back into the same place of police and the local elected officials not on the same page, even though they will argue they have a common goal. So no, I think this whole idea of defund the police is a liberal knee-jerk action to an issue that they created, thinking it's going to be popular among Black people. But like I said before, Black people have their own idea of what's important to them.
And I love that as a foundation because it speaks to agency and, as you said, respect. And there's something else that is under address, too. One thing is what you're saying, telling Black people what they want. The other thing is telling America who Black people are. And I want to get your perspective on how you think, if you agree with me, that the media caricatures Black Americans. It is either celebrities in music and athletics, or it is stories of crime in crime-infested neighborhoods. And in point of fact, there are very few people, white or black, in this country who commit crimes. The white violent crime rate is 0.12% of the white population. The black crime rate is 0.44% of the black population. So it's higher, but it's still a tiny fraction of the black American experience. Not all black Americans are living in ghettos. A lot are middle income families in the suburbs and the exurbs and everywhere else. And the media presentation is you're either a celebrity who needs to be a social activist, or you're somebody who is a dependent of the state, or living or trapped in a crime-ridden neighborhood, or had a death of a family through violence. And there's nothing in between. And I think it provides a complete misunderstanding of what's happening in black America.
Well, Dan, I think you're right that white America has always had I would say, somewhat stigmatized vision of black America, and that has found itself and been portrayed in the media, because the media is a reflection of the people who run the media and the people who watch the media. And so they tend to reinforce each other by giving people what they think they know is of interest, and what the people who watch it believe to be of interest. But having said that, there is a definite disparity in the equality of black life and white life in America, and we shouldn't ignore that. I'll give you just one data point. The median net worth of a white American family is median income is $170,000. The median income of a black American family is $17,000. That's a 10-time spread in income and therefore wealth. That gap has to be closed, and it has to be closed by white America coming to grips with the fact that they've got to figure out a way to close that wealth gap by making sure equal opportunity, equal rights, and racial inequities are eliminated, so that we can be equal in what is part of the American dream, which is access to capital, access to wealth, and their access for the ability to care for your family, build a nice home, build a stable community, take care of your health, and all the other things that go with having the income to do so. So we can't overlook that. There clearly is sort of stereotypes in the way blacks are perceived, and then based on sort of an unconscious bias about how blacks are depicted. But the fact is, there are some real serious divergence in things like income, housing, education, and the like.
I want to talk about that, but just that statistic. I mean, I'm looking at 2016 census data. Median household income for Indian Americans, $131,000. For East Asians, $85,000. For whites, $67,000. So are you talking about median household income or net worth? The median household income for whites can't be $170,000. That's almost the top 2%.
Well, if you look at the Pew Research study, remember now, the median is
half above, half below,
and half are below that.
Right.
So that's when you come to the median. Now, if you talk about the average.
No, I'm talking about median from the census.
From what I have been reading about and what I see, and I've seen it quoted throughout all of the major publications.
Okay,
when you look at median income, there's a 10 times differential between white families and black families.
Well, okay, so the underlying issue about the disparity. So why do you think that is, and why do you think that it's exacerbated, even as Jim Crow has been relegated to the ash heap of history, and all the money that's been spent on social welfare programs over the last 50 years, and all the money that's been spent on K through 12 education, which has gone up at a 45-degree angle, including in urban centers? Why is that? Why does that disparity persist, in your view?
To me, Dan, it's very simple. It's access to capital. That's it. White Americans didn't get wealthy simply because they're white. Black Americans aren't below white income simply because they're black. There's nothing in the DNA of a white person that makes them, have a greater work ethic, more concerned about their kids and their family, more interested in owning a home and everything else that goes with having a stable part of the American dream. It is they have access to capital. Black Americans do not. And I'm sitting here, as you described me, as the first African American billionaire. I grew up in a little town not far from Chicago called Freeport, Illinois.
Oh, yeah, we're familiar with the pretzels.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Heard you're
right.
a great basketball player, by the way.
Right. And so when you think about that, I got my start in building black entertainment television on a $500,000 cash investment, capital investment, from a guy named John Malone who owned the cable companies at the time.
Yeah, right.
That's the difference. And going all the way back to slavery, slavery was a wealth transfer. People who owned slaves had free labor. Just imagine what you and your listeners could do if you had free labor. You didn't have to pay for the guy who mowed your lawn. You didn't have to pay for the guy who come and fix your sink or your refrigerator when it breaks down. You didn't have to pay for your babysitter. You didn't have to pay for somebody to help you build a house or a barn. Just think of what you would do with that capital. You would invest it. And the one thing I want to point out, and people should know, your listeners should know, that money that many white Americans accumulated came from free slave labor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how this country has grown. Black Americans were not in the queue for access to capital because it was denied. But first, they were property. Then, like you said, when you're talking about earlier, it's Jim Crow segregation. It's lack of access to quality education. It's lack of access to job opportunity. You put those impediments in front of anybody, black or white.
Right.
They're going to find themselves cut out in a free market capitalist economy, cut out from the opportunity to grow and accumulate wealth.
But you
So
weren't.
now you want that leads into reparations. And what is your plan, and how do you think that should be? How the cash should be distributed?
Yeah, Amy, that's a good question to ask because reparations is not a new phenomenon. So I just want people to understand that. In fact, reparations was first stated by the Civil War generals from the North, Sherman, when he took over Atlanta, sort of promised loosely 40 acres and a mule, which is reparations for slavery. Well, reparations is part of what I call an atonement or repair or forgiveness, and it has been done. The people who are in Germany today, who had nothing to do with Adolf Hitler and Nazism, are still paying reparations to the millions of Jews who were murdered in the concentration camps. And they're doing it because they want to close that dark history and move on into another relationship with minorities or any other people who feel that they were needlessly harmed for no fault of their own. And that's what reparations is here. If white America says we want to make all African Americans equally wealthy to us, you can't stop white Americans from growing wealth. That would be wrong. But what you can do, you can accelerate African American growth by reparations. And my proposal of $14 trillion is simply a mathematical equation. It says, again, Dan may disagree, but we say the wealth of a white family is about $350,000. The wealth of a black family is somewhat less than that. So if you want to bring black people up to that level, you say $350,000 times 40 million African American descendants of slaves, you get $14 trillion. You divide it up by months, it's about $11,000. I mean, if you do it on an annual basis, it's about $11,000 per person, per taxpayer in the U.S., including African Americans, by the way. That's how you get to it. But the real question is, if you harm somebody through no fault of their own and you benefited from that harm, i.e. slave labor, why wouldn't you, in a capitalist economy where you believe in due process of law, nobody should be deprived of their property without their rights without due process, and that people should be repaid if they have been harmed? Why wouldn't you agree to that?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question I have.
I want to get to that question, but I just want to go back for one moment. You're talking about access to capital. I mean, you're a gentleman who's in his 70s, and you went to University of Illinois after you graduated from Freeport High School, and you got your master's at Princeton, and then you were on your way into your successful business career. So,
Right.
so it does happen. You did it. Why doesn't it happen more? Particularly for people who didn't grow up under Jim Crow like you did.
So that it doesn't happen because there's not enough focus on making sure the capital get to people who are like me, who had an idea, reached out to a gentleman named John Malone, was fortunate enough to be in an industry called cable TV when it was growing,
Mm-hmm.
able to do it like that. But I was that 1 in 10. You know, UB40 has a great tune called Number 1 in 10. It's just
Robert Johnson is a UB40 fan? Okay, all right, very good.
absolutely. You can't do this if you just drop it on the 1 in 100 or the 1 in 1,000. Sure, that'll make me wealthy. That'll make Oprah wealthy. That'll make Jay-Z wealthy. Michael Jordan. That'll make all of us wealthy. But there are 40 million African Americans in this country.
But now let's go back to the reparations conversation. And there's 40 million African Americans in this country, as you said, and obviously you would, regardless of the piddling over the statistics, there are a lot of successful Black Americans who have net worths in excess of $350,000. And so is there any income tiering to your proposal, or just as a general rule, because just as a general statement, everybody gets $350,000 because everybody is a descendant and suffered at some point in their familial history from the racist institutions of Jim Crow and slavery?
You said it better than I could.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I understood your argument.
So yeah, because here's the thing, Dan. Let's say you're and you probably are. You're a wealthy guy living in one of the sky, high-rise apartments.
sure.
Yeah, no
on
children.
Yeah,
so
sure.
he's got
on
extra.
Michigan Avenue, and somebody, you make all the money on the radio station, you get all this money.
Yeah,
Somebody
sure.
breaks into your house, steals your TV, steals your computer, locks you in the closet, does all kinds of bad things to you, and you file and the court say, Dan, you're awarded damages. The court doesn't look at you and say, well, Dan, you're doing pretty well financially. I don't think you should get these damages because you're okay. You don't need them.
Right.
They say you are entitled to this because you have been harmed through no fault of your own. And the court says our job is to give you justice. And in the case of reparations, it is justice plus atonement. Because if white America could ever atone, and by the way, they've done this for the Japanese Americans who were put in what they call internment camps during World War II. They've done that. But my thing is, think about the power of forgiveness manifested in saying we're going to bring you equal and give you a great shot at the American dream. And you know what? Black Americans are the most forgiving people you will ever find on the face of this earth. You guys remember the massacre of church people in Charleston, South Carolina?
Yeah, of course.
And you know what the first thing that the parishioners who survived that event did at the hearing sentencing?
Forgave the shooter, right?
They forgave the shooter. And remember the black brother of the guy who was killed by a white cop because she thought he was in her house?
Yeah.
What did he ask the judge? Can I hug her?
Yes, it was unbelievable.
Beautiful.
I mean, so
Yeah.
it's like it's unbelievable. So when you think of the power of forgiveness, that to me is probably the best way this country gets beyond this path and start moving to that bright future of what we all like to call American exceptionalism.
Well, let me just challenge your analogy about the guy breaking into my house and doing me harm and so forth. It falls down, of course, as you'll recognize, so I'm interested in your response, because we know who the perpetrator was and we know who the victim was. In the case of reparations, I'm going to write a check for $11,000, as you said, And I didn't perpetrate anything. I wasn't a part of Jim Crow legislative imposition, and I wasn't a slaveholder. And so the justice system works to provide recompense to the victim, and to hold perpetrators responsible. But you have generations of separation between the perpetrators and the victims.
Yeah, that's a legal argument. If you were really in a court of law, that would be something to argue. But reparations never gets to a court of law. Reparations is a society looking at a past sin against another group and saying we owe it not only to the victims, we owe it to ourselves to make this right. So I would say the same thing. If you owned a great Brauhaus restaurant in Munich, Germany, and people came to you and said, you grew up long after Hitler was gone, and people came to you and said, Dan, we're going to tax your restaurant because you're going to have to pay some money to help the Jews who moved on to Israel and resettled there because of what we did. I can't imagine you would be able to look your friends in the eye, all who were paying, to say, look, I wasn't born when Hitler did his thing. I don't know any of the victims. I don't want to pay them anything. I don't believe that. I don't know you well, but I know you at all, Blake. I don't believe you would do that.
Well,
and I don't believe you look your kids in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And when they read the history of what Hitler did to Germany and to the Jews and basically the United World War II, I don't think you could look your kids in the eye and say, son, daughter, Dad is not buying into this reparations thing for Jews. I'm sorry. I'm just not giving them anything. I just don't believe you do that. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that for black people who were slaves, and there was slavery.
Right.
And that the slave wealth was the fuel that drove the U.S. wealth growth in the economy. I'll tell you this. I've said this before. If you give me 20 forensic accountants, the best you can get, Pricewaterhouse, all these other firms, give me the best. I can trace a huge amount of the wealth in this country directly back to free slave labor. In fact, universities are doing it already because they're admitting that their university endowments came from owning slave ships or insuring slave ships. So that's the point I want to make. Atonement is different from a legal document saying you're owed. It is a spiritual statement of forgiveness.
Let me ask you one other question before we unfortunately have to let you go, and that is about $350,000. Then what about the welfare state programs? Can we then reimagine the welfare state and start? And now that people have seed capital to chart their own course, why would we need welfare state programs?
You know what? Absolutely, you can reimagine the level of welfare state programs. Because think about this. There's food stamps, there's direct welfare payments, there's subsidized housing. All of those things are made part of the welfare state because the people who would love to own a home don't have the down payment to buy a home. So yes, you would reduce many of these things. You would reduce social problems in black communities. You would reduce crime in black communities. You would increase, I believe, you would increase families staying together, which is a major force in wealth. If there's a husband and a wife in the home, those homes tend to be higher in wealth and income and family stability.
Absolutely.
Because why would an African-American man want to leave his woman when they're both got jobs, they're both own a home, they're both doing well, there's no frustration, no stress, because one is not achieving what they should do as a man to take care of his family, protect his home. A lot of those welfare programs that, by the way, people are paying taxes for right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are the direct result of lack of access to income.
Well, I'll tell you,
whether it's health care or whether it's home ownership.
I'll tell you what, it's really interesting. I want to continue this conversation with you. We're going to have you back soon because, that is a way to potentially get somewhere, I think. I think it's really interesting, and I knew you'd have layered thinking on the topic, which is why it's so enjoyable to speak with you. Robert Johnson, founder of BET, RLJ Companies, America's first black billionaire, and a Freeport pretzel for life. Robert Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
I look forward to joining you and Amy again. Take care, Dan. Amy.
Take care.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. And coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
We'll take your reactions to